Hello, Thought Roomies, and welcome. I'm your host, Hallie Rose. As I sit here and record this intro, I am looking out the window where it is snowing in upstate New York, and what a surprise that was to wake up to this morning. But it's actually pretty relevant because I wanted to share a poem with you that I wrote a little while ago that really touched my heart when I thought about what's going on. I wrote this poem, I believe, when I was in an airplane looking out of the window and we were in the middle of a lightning storm. This poem is called Kite. A kite tossed in the storm, spinning madly, rain-ripped and battered, flailing wildly between strips of lightning. Clouds bashed together like cymbals, sending deep guttural vibrations into the belly of the earth. I am afraid. I am the kite. I am terrified. I am the storm. I wanted to share that poem because it speaks to some of the feelings that I personally have been going through this week. It's been a difficult one for me. It seems to change quite rapidly. Last week, I was feeling super optimistic and participated in the global meditation and was loving seeing everybody bond together for something of that scale. And this week I've been having to sit in a little bit more of the shadow. And when I think about this poem, I am afraid I am the kite. There's this sense of I'm afraid that I don't have control here, that I'm just being tossed around and manipulated by the outside, and I just have to allow myself to be battered around. And then the last line of the poem, I am terrified, I am the storm. There's so many meanings there for me, but one of the interpretations is I'm afraid that I'm part of what's causing this. Or to take a more optimistic perspective, I'm afraid, I am terrified of the power that is me, that I know is here. And this whole time I was thinking I was the kite, when really I am this immensely powerful storm. So I want to leave you with that to think on today. My guest this week is Luke Storey, whom many of you know and adore. He's a motivational speaker. He's a kundalini yoga and meditation teacher. He's a world-class biohacker and host of the very popular podcast, the Life Stylist Podcast, that I know many of you listen to and love. So Luke and I did this interview down at Soltar Healing Center in Costa Rica a few months ago. And Luke shares about his experiences with ayahuasca. And in many ways, this episode is just so relevant to what's going on globally. I was listening to it again this morning before I recorded this, and Luke talks about this immense sense of isolation and separation that he discovered within himself, and how he's had to look at the ways in which he's created that for himself. And he talks about how in order to bring others into our lives and create true intimacy, we first need to find a sense of belonging within our own heart. So I think this right now, the present, is a perfect time to go into your own heart, to cultivate the relationship with yourself that you never really had before. I can't help but think that when we all get the beautiful opportunity to go out and hug and greet each other once again in the world, how much better off the world would be if every person at home right now got to know themselves, got to know their own heart, even just 5% more than before. You don't have to have a full-blown awakening and walk away from this whole thing like an enlightened guru. But everyone at home right now has the opportunity, and there's the invitation to just do a little bit of self-inquiry, do a little bit of your own inner work, and listen to your heart now. Luke and I get into some pretty deep emotional spaces in this podcast. We actually both have moments during this recording where we individually get a little choked up while telling our intimate stories from our painful pasts. Luke on his path to recovering from addiction, and myself talking about my cyclical dances with depression. Speaking of that, I really have been in a process this week, and I like to share that with people because even with all the tools that I have been able to acquire over the years, all of the books I've read, all of the plant medicine that I have done, I too have my struggle right now. And I'm slowly learning, like a toddler learning the world. I'm learning my new world right now, which is this one where I'm in a little bit more of self-isolation. I'm not really seeing people. So dealing with loneliness and all of those things. Still doing my meditation, still doing my writing. And I think it's really, really important to try and use those practices that we cultivated before all of this went down as much as we can to anchor ourselves into a sense of who we are and what we value in the middle of all the chess pieces sort of moving around us. So for me, I've been feeling a little sluggish, feeling like it was hard to get things done on time and follow deadlines, because I really feel like the skeletons of the systems we've created are no longer hung with the trappings of the sort of saggy illusions that we've dressed it with. So there's a bareness that's present here. And looking at anything bare or barren can be a little bit jarring. It can be a little bit grotesque. So we're in a time right now where every structure in which we live can be questioned. And I'm not just talking about building structures. I'm talking about infrastructure. I'm talking about the way we treat each other. Why so much separation? Why so many borders? Who are these rules for? Even down to the way that we create seasons, the way that we mark time and label our weeks, and all of these things that we've created to be able to contain the immensity of the truth of who we are. We are the storm. We are this infinite power, and that's a lot to wrap our minds around. So we kind of create this structured reality to have it make more sense to us, which is fine. But it just seems like some of those systems are antiquated, and it is time to look for new solutions. This universe is a sandbox, and we all have to realize that we built this sandcastle of the reality that we share together. We built it, and we are building it right now in every moment. it's not like things were always this way. They weren't. You don't even have to look back very far in human history to see that what we're creating right now is very different than what our parents were creating at their time, or the children born 10 years ago and the children born right now. I mean, they're experiencing very different realities amongst them. Think of even the technological changes. I know, I remember AOL dial-up and I remember having a home phone and seeing rotary phones, and when cell phones were called car phones and they were these big blocks like kept in a bag and you didn't really take it anywhere with you. You just kept it in your car. I mean, things have changed so much since then. And I want you to stop and I want you to give yourself a little credit for living through this time. It's okay to feel overwhelmed. It's okay to be unsure. You deserve that. It's okay to have that. And to nod at it and to thank it and bless it, and then we move on. We move forward. So thank you all so much for choosing with your time to be here with me today and to grow and to work on yourself. I'm so blessed for each and every one of you. I know that doing this podcast keeps me accountable. It keeps me looking out to the world, and it keeps me optimistic in so many ways. So thank you for healing me while doing your own healing. I hope that you enjoy this episode, and I hope that you'll consider sharing it with someone that you love. So without further ado, let's step into the thought room with the one and only Luke Storey. Luke Storey, welcome to the Thought Room Podcast. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you. I love thoughts and I love rooms.
Wonderful. We're off to a great start. So we're here at Soltara Healing Center this week, and you're a guest here. And as I understand it, you've had this concluded last night, I suppose, was your 8th ceremony with ayahuasca. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And
inside of 1 year.
Inside of 1 year.
So we're in December right now. I just realized this when I got here because I don't, once something passes, I have no idea what year it took place.
Right.
Not a linear time aware person. But my friend Dominic, who's also here, was at the last ceremonies that I did with me. And he was like, oh, that was in January. So.
And that was at Rhythmia. Correct?
That was 11 months ago. Yeah.
Wow. So 11 months, 8 ayahuasca ceremonies.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm ready to dive in with you. I'm really excited to hear kind of, I guess, the trajectory of how you feel that's affected your life. But maybe we want to start with right now, last day of the retreat, kind of a nice day to decompress, maybe some thoughts and things starting to settle. We had our final sharing circle this morning at 10 a.m. and you shared some really beautiful thoughts. So maybe if you just want to start with what's feeling most potent for you in this moment and your experience here this week at Soltara, and we can go from there.
Man, it's so multifaceted. In many ways, there are so many nuances to it. But I think the overall theme has been twofold. One is really in a very concrete way, understanding that the solution to any sense of isolation or loneliness or needing other people's love, validation, appreciation, although it's totally normal and natural to need those, but without me really having a home in my heart, then I've had the tendency at times in all kinds of relationships to sort of abandon myself and sell myself short because I don't want to face not being liked or accepted. And then I was able to kind of trace that back, that whole pattern. And I think a lot of it has to do with just asserting myself and keeping my own sense of autonomy and not being apologetic for being who and what I am, unless it's warranted and I'm being a dick.
Right.
There's always a time for amends, but I've noticed a pattern in my life of feeling a bit disconnected from people at large, and going back way early on into my early childhood, feeling this existential loneliness, just kind of like alone in the universe. And even in familial relationships and in school early on, I never felt a part of. And so my early and quite long-standing coping mechanism for that sense was to connect to drugs. And that's how I found a sense of home within myself and a sense of comfort when I was alone, because I had that as a friend and a way to alter the way that I felt exogenously. And so I think this week has been really looking into, I was doing a lot of inquiry, like Q&A, just praying to God, praying to the medicine, praying to my higher self. It's kind of all the same thing. Because I've kind of, I've got stuck on like, well, who's giving me these answers? Is that ayahuasca? Is that the God?
Right.
Or is it my higher self? And it's all of those. I think it's contextually speaking in the macro, it is God as a whole, or spirit. And sometimes those messages seem to come through the consciousness of the medicine or the consciousness of my higher self. But what really started to become clear in, I think it was yesterday's ceremony, was that I've always been looking for a sense of family. And so I was kind of praying about that. Is what's missing is that feeling I have because I don't have a wife and kids and like have that nuclear family unit that I never really experienced for any, extended period of time as a kid. I left home at 14 and, that was it, And so, and the answer came back. It's like, no, it's not that. They can't fix you. You can't get a sense of feeling at home because you add people to you. It's like that would be more home is where the heart is. It's like you'd have to have like this cozy house and people in it for you to feel in your heart in that situation. And so the phrase that came to me, which ended up really kind of being unpacked into a much deeper meaning, was heart is where the home is. And so it became so concrete and tangible to me that sense of, not all the time, but an underlying aura of isolation, even with people. I'm a people person. I'm an extrovert and I'm pretty alpha and like emotionally in tune and able to access empathy and compassion and really feel into people. But at the same time, there's often this sense of separation. And so it had a lot to do with just the application of that truth as a takeaway of just really staying within my own heart and having a true sense of self and belonging and contentment within me, and really finding my home within my heart. I mean, even my physical heart and ethereal heart, both. And that when that's present, then the addition of other into that space will never compromise my own integrity and my own self-love and self-worth to the point where I then abandon myself to keep that security from other. And so it's like a very profound realization that yes, we need people and I need people, and there's nothing wrong with needing people. We need hugs, we need sex, we need affection, we need understanding, we need to be heard, we need to hear others, we need community, we need connection. And I think in my life that connection was always being substituted in one way or another, And there have been of course, real connections too, but it was like, the primary connection is to the self. And then that sort of led me back to thinking about, well, why didn't I ever develop that sense of self? And then I could go back to my very earliest abuse as a kid when I was 5 or 6, and there was a lot of it throughout my childhood and adolescence and even into my adult life to some degree. In the adult life, more so brought on myself, whereas as a kid I was an innocent bystander, But it's that my innocence was robbed so young that my inner sense was not developed. And that's how the medicine works with me, through words. There's always these double meanings and these stacks of different applications of the words, like a verb will turn into a noun and vice versa, and the whole language gets kind of jumbled up. And so I thought, and I had that realization last time. I had this deep experience of losing my innocence as a little boy, and really felt through that. It's not something I've been suppressing or not looked at. I mean, I've been to therapy. I've done all the things to deal with that in, out there in the I was about to say the real world. I don't know which one's real right now at this point. I think they're both quite real. But it's not like I've never delved into that or felt those feelings and cried and written and prayed and, sort of inventoried my life and looked at the chain of events that led me into such a self-destructive path. But that inner sense, innocence connection was really huge, because I could see that's kind of where it was lost. And then going back to January's ceremony, one of them, I experienced in a very brief and subtle way my birth, and sort of just had a really quick little vision of it. And I wasn't even in that kind of hallucinatory state of the medicine. It was actually a night where I didn't really feel anything. I was just kind of bored and my mind was wandering, and I sort of had this vision of my birth, and I was born, and the nurses grabbed me from my mom and threw me down the hall in this incubator. And then they just shut the door and left me in there alone. And it was like, oh shit, that was the first abandonment. And I thought, well, maybe that was just a dream or a fantasy that night. And I texted my mom the next day, and she said, oh no, that's exactly what happened when you were born. I was like, whoa, holy shit. She's like, yeah, they left you in there for 3 or 4 days and no one could touch you or come in there because there was a risk of infection or something. And so even then, coming out into the world was this sense of isolation. Because you're not isolated in the womb. It's like you are your mother. You're part of her. But when you're out, if I get the sense that if you're not immediately swooped up and held and made to feel safe and made to feel connected and a sense of belonging, that it is likely difficult to establish that later. And especially if there's an onslaught of trauma and abuse that comes within those next few years, So that's been a huge revelation, and there's of course more, and I'm sure we'll get into it, but it's just like seeing that thread from day zero, or I guess day zero, out of the the womb and into the cradle of the material plane, is that there's been a sense of being alone. And then not a sense of being at home within myself, because I didn't know how to access that. And so much futile effort has been spent and tried to achieve that sense of connection from the outside in, through people, through controlling how I feel, controlling my environment, and even after, escaping narrowly from a life of drug addiction and quite possibly and likely prison, and that whole, the trajectory that I was on, is now I'm really seeing that so clearly, seeing that thread and seeing how that manifests, and going back to the day when we set our intentions. My intention really was to see, looking back at some of my relationships in business and friends and romance and all ways that I've interacted with other people, there have been many occasions where I've put myself in harm's way and remained in situations that were hurting me, where I was treated poorly, and I stayed for that. for periods of time, in some cases, many years,
Mm.
out of fear of being abandoned and left alone again.
Yeah, you said something this morning that was, I forgave myself for not standing up for myself.
Wow, I forgot about that. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I think when I was going back and just looking at myself as a kid and those early situations in which I was powerless over my environment and circumstances and had no way to defend myself, I don't know that I blamed myself for that, but it was just like, oh God, little Luke. I was kind of just talking to that kid, just going, dude, like, what were you going to do? The grown-ups are abusing you. You're a little kid. You can't, there's no defense for that,
Mm-hmm.
And so, and then also forgiveness as an adult when I did have a choice. But see, what I find is that those trauma imprints in the brain, in the physical brain, and I guess kind of in consciousness and mind too, to some degree, are so deeply rooted that even as an adult, when I have full authority to take care of myself and have healthy boundaries and walk away or confront people when they're inappropriate or something like that, I was still living from that little boy inside that still didn't know how to find a voice. And so I had to forgive my adult self as a man. Now I'm almost 50 years old and I'm like, fuck, I still have that little boy in me from those early scars that is afraid to say, you know what, fuck you, and just walk from any situation that's not serving me or a situation in which I'm not being honored or respected. And so it's not about those people and being a victim. It's about me going, shit, I need to take responsibility for myself because I'm not a little boy anymore. Now I know better. And, having to forgive myself for that. And then also I just did a lot of, I don't know, it's crazy. It's crazy, but it's not. But I really went into that inner child and just, kind of forgave him and myself and just said, we're not going to come from that perspective anymore, from those early experiences. We're starting at a new turning point now in a new paradigm where adult Luke is going to handle shit and is going to be more discerning and have more prudence and more wisdom and be less naive, less gullible, and
yeah, and you all
clear up the rose-colored glasses a little bit, because I really give people the benefit of the doubt, and I really see the purity even in the most wretched folks because I just know what's underneath that, and I know anyone that's hurting people has been hurt, and so I see that hurt kid within the perpetrator, as it were. And so it's like I've always just been like, well, that's not the real them, so I can just love on the real them, and eventually like they're going to feel that I'm authentically loving who they are. When I look in their eyes, I see like their lifetimes, I see their genes, I see their past, I see their trauma. Like in some level I really feel into that, and I think, well, once they see that I see, then only the good will come out. And that's not always the case, because people still karmically have to work through all of their demons in order to be able to activate and embody their higher, true, divine self. So one of the other like plays on words was, I was kind of, again, asking questions and looking, and I thought, well, the reason that sometimes I get in a situation like that is because I see someone's soul, and aren't you supposed to do that? It's like, what, I'm supposed to see the surface them, their personality, mind, ego? That's not who they are. I want to get to the real person as quickly as possible and like really suss that out. And the answer that I got back was, yes, Luke, see the soul, but also see the whole, as in WHOLE, see the whole, see the whole picture of not just people, but in any situation, in other words, like grow up and, don't blindfold yourself by, wishful thinking about a situation or a person or how it's going to go. And then it was like, yeah, see the soul, but also see the whole, HOLE, meaning see what's missing in that person or environment or situation, in that deal or whatever kind of arrangement it is that's causing my life to be feeling unmanageable and causing me harm. It's like, no, don't ignore that darkness. It needs to be acknowledged, and then I can make better decisions with full knowledge of the complete picture rather than just seeing kind of what I want to see or having this sort of pious view of everyone's innocence. Even though everyone is ultimately innocent at their core, people also have a lot of shit. And so do I. And I've been practicing for a long time, seeing my whole shit. I know that there are elements of me that are quite divine, and there's also elements that are still selfish and full of shit and lazy and procrastinate, and I do all kinds of dumb stuff. Less and less of it, as time goes on, but I've arrived there from really inventorying myself. And I guess the message is like, sometimes it's important to inventory other people too. Not in a judgmental way, because that implies that there's something wrong with them, but in an observational way. It's like observing that, wow, that wall needs to be painted, is not going, who's the fucking dumbass that painted that wall? Right. Shouldn't be like that. Well, it just is like that. That's an observation. Observation is just having an awareness of something without a sense of negative judgment on it. So that's a little, that's a sliver of like what's transpired this week. It's crazy.
I think this is probably going to resonate with a lot of people who are on this path meaning spiritual development or personal growth, because this idea of, in my opinion, it's almost like spiritually bypassing ourselves, and what I mean by that is always taking the higher road and going, oh, well, they're just in a process, or, oh, they're doing this. And I'm going to speak from my own perspective, but sometimes I don't allow myself to fully feel the feelings as they bubble up in a situation. So, someone will do something and I'll go, oh, they're doing them, or they're, not there yet, or I just have to send love, send love, send love. But later on down the road, I'll go, oh, I was really angry about that. And yes, I'm this soul, I'm this being going through this experience, but I'm in a human body, and I have chemicals that get triggered and emotional reactions that get stored in my body. And I'm doing a disservice to myself by not letting the river flow through to the ocean, as in having the feeling, acknowledging it, not punishing it, not going, oh, you shouldn't feel angry, go meditate more. It's like, just allow it to come up and experience it. So I think other people, I've talked to a lot of people who really are trying to figure out the nuances of that same dance.
It is a form of spiritual bypass. I think, for me, it's not that I don't mind feeling feelings. I've gotten decent at allowing feelings to manifest and work through them because it's so painful to avoid them. I think what's been difficult for me is the element of confrontation and really standing up for myself. And you nailed it when you talked about the chemicals in the body, because that's what was going on last night. It was like I was tracing back those sort of patterns that I just described, and then there was clarity about that, but it still left me with the sense, okay, I get it. I see the framework of this phenomenon, but how do I fucking fix it? Like, how do I not do that? How do I walk in a room and go, you know what? Fuck this. Nope, not happening. I have a really hard time doing that in some situations, not always, but there are times. And I thought, why am I so afraid of just standing up for myself and having a voice, And then I started to go, I was in that place where it's like no time and just, that space. The Matrix. It's just like, oh shit. And I'm in the quantum, really feels like the quantum field. And there's no even like my mind, it's just higher mind and higher self is in this field, and there are answers, and I'm able to navigate into other realms in there and actually do things intentionally. And so I saw that the root of that fear comes from being a kid, being terrified, being subjected to rage, anger, violence, sexual abuse, all of those things that are so damaging to the brain. And so I could see in the limbic system that there were these stored memories of instances such as the ones I just described.
So you could actually see this.
Yeah.
You know,
So in the hippocampus, I think it's called hippocampus, hypercampus. No, hippocampus, I believe it's called. And I could botch this. It's just what came to me. You know, it was like, oh, this is what happened. And then so those memories get stored in there in the subconscious. They're way back there, and they're in a bank. And then in adult life, when a situation that's similar happens, there's a signal between the hippocampus and the amygdala goes back to the hippocampus to find a point of reference for a similar experience or feeling. And when it gets it, it locks onto that and then squirts out adrenaline and cortisol into your fucking bloodstream. And then you're in fight or flight. Then I don't typically fight until it builds up for a while, and then I will lose my shit in a very healthy way that actually feels really good because I finally can't take it anymore and I find my voice. But what I usually do is I freeze. You know, I'm just like, if they can't see me, I can't see them. And that freezing is a response to that limbic system overreacting to a situation that doesn't warrant that. It's like, all I need to do is like tell the guy next to me in the parking lot, hey man, would you mind parking a little further away? You know, you're about to scratch my car. So just something like that. And I'm like, oh, I can't say anything. Like, I don't want to get in a fight. Like, I don't want bad vibes. Like, it's okay. I'll just leave it. Like people pleasing and shit like that, you know? And so when I started to see the anatomy of the brain and the source of those memories and how that works, at least how I was shown, anyone with a deeper understanding of the brain listening might correct me, and please do, but it doesn't really matter, you know, if I have the names and the different components of the brain right, but I'm pretty sure it works something like that. So I actually went in there and I was doing this psychic surgery on my brain, and I was removing the connection between those thought forms and subconscious memories in the hippocampus, disconnecting those from the amygdala, and then like surgically moving them away, those connections, and then also lovingly and compassionately communicating with the amygdala and just saying, hey, listen, I really appreciate that you've been doing your best to keep me alive in the following ways. That when you see a situation that is familiar, you go back and grab one of those other memories, and then you make that connection and you fill me full of chemicals. And I know you're doing it because you love me and you want to protect me and you want me to be ready, to be poised to fight or flee or freeze. But I don't need you to do that anymore because I'm a grown-ass man now. I only need you to do that when I'm about to get in a car accident or hit by a train or miss a flight, or when I really have to mobilize my faculties legitimately for something that is real that's happening now, not something that is an imagined now, that if I confront myself in a situation or stand up for myself, that I'm going to be hurt or abandoned or violated or whatever the case may be. And so I just said, listen, you can work like 1/8 as hard as you do right now. I just need you there in a real emergency, but you're free to go. Just let it go. It's okay. We're safe, you know. And then this went on for a while of just like really going in and just, I don't know, it's a psychic surgery, the only way I can explain it, you know. And then it's like, well, let's see if it worked. I don't know if, if the surgery was successful or not. I've not been in a situation in which I'm triggered. And I imagine, realistically, I will quite possibly experience situations in which I'm triggered. But I do have a sense now that I'm going to give less fucks about what other people think when I need to take care of myself. Mm. And in finding my voice, it also occurred to me that in the last 4 years or so that I've been doing what I do professionally now, which is what I'm doing right now, is I use my voice. That's who I am. I talk, and so it's a matter of applying that, the authenticity that I'm able to access in moments like this, where I know that I'm being real and authentic, in situations that are scarier I want to be able to, and know that I am able to bring that same authenticity and be my true self and not hide aspects of myself or feelings that I have or opinions that I have, or being able to stop a situation that's not serving me. And then there's another play on words. It's like, as soon as I was like, yeah, sometimes I hide, like I don't let people see like what I'm really feeling. If something bothers me, I don't say anything because I don't want the conflict, and I don't want to be abandoned. I don't want to be disliked. And so I just put up with shit. And I said, yeah, don't hide. Don't be like chupacabras. Chupacabras is out there hiding in the jungle. And then the thought came to me, it's like, don't be Luca Cabras. Just fucking come out with it, just do you.
Yeah.
And if people don't like it or can't hang,
yeah.
Peace to the east. They're not my people.
Mm.
If they can't handle my truth, that's legitimate, so yeah, it's like I'm coming through this week going, geez, I thought I had pretty decent self-esteem, but it's like, wow, there's a lot of limitation that's been placed on myself because of that chemical reaction that takes place, and I'm so afraid of feeling that oftentimes I'm not true to myself and I leave myself. And that goes back full circle to that staying in my heart. In my heart, I'm not afraid. I can tell you anything I need to say. It's when I get up in my head and I get in my brain and all those chemicals are firing. And it's like, if I am true to myself, I'm going to lose something or not get something that I want. Those two primary fears. I'm going to lose something that I have. I'm not going to get something that I want. That's the fear. It's just like, okay, just freeze. Just stay still. Don't move.
Yeah.
And that's a very paralyzing experience to have, especially when you're in a situation where you're being hurt or wronged or mistreated or something like that.
I mean, I think those are our basic survival instincts, and like you said, you just embrace them and you talked lovingly to them. And I think that's beautiful. That's incredible. I want to go back to what you were saying about this kind of deep, sort of ubiquitous loneliness that you were feeling as a child, and how that spiraled into your eventual, you said, drugs, but I'm assuming you mean using recreationally. And I want to ask for you, coming from that journey, entering into something 11 months ago, like ayahuasca.
That's quite a leap.
And well, yeah, I mean, you had this experience, with drugs, and this, for a lot of people listening, would consider it a drug. Other people would consider it a medicine. So I'm curious about your perspective and how you were able to kind of bridge that gap to take a deep dive into doing something potentially pretty scary.
Well, when I did ayahuasca in January, at that time I was a month away from being 22 years sober. I mean, like sober,
No drugs, no alcohol.
No. A hard no. I just don't do that, And so it was no accident that it took me 22 years to explore that, because I really had to. There was a curiosity about it, but never really a desire. So I didn't have to examine it that hard. But when the curiosity started to sort of well, because I would just hear more stories and it became more prevalent in some circles that I roam in, not so much with sober people. In fact, there was only one sober person that I knew of that had done it. And I remember hearing about that and I was like, oh, that guy's using. Like, I was like, oh, he's not sober anymore. He did ayahuasca. I was like, whoa, stay away from that guy. Like, that's bad news kind of thing. This is many, many years ago.
Wow.
But then over the years, I started getting little bits of information and I'm hearing people's insights. And my curiosity started to sort of hit this crest of subtle desire. I was like, I wonder if that would be something that'd be good for me, because I have seen it to be so transformational for many people. Now, not people that had, well, actually, later on I did meet quite a few people that had been drug addicts and alcoholics and stuff and were rendered sober by just doing plant medicine. And that was, when I started to hear those stories, I think that was like, oh, wait, this is perhaps something different, But I had to really go inside and really pray about it. And it wasn't something that I set out to pursue, but I just kind of kept my ears open and was just curious about it to learn more. And if I met someone that had done it, I would ask them to explain to me what happened and things like that. But it's I have such a healthy respect for my past and the things that I went through that, there's just, if you try to get me to take a sip of wine or like take a hit off a joint or do some coke or something, that is never going to happen ever in this lifetime. Who knows? Maybe next life I'll be able to drink a few beers here and there and keep it chill. But in this one, I fucking know because I've already lived it. You know what I mean? I already tried to manage and control drinking and using drugs. And I did that for 15 years. I was always trying to find a way to control it. So the idea of possibly triggering that phenomenon of craving and letting the tiger out of the cage was just absolutely terrifying. And, who knows, maybe at this point in my life, after all the work I've done and after some plant medicine, maybe, just maybe, every couple of years I could have a glass of wine at Christmas. But if I can't, I'm fucked. So I'm not going to risk it. It's just where I came from is so destitute and so painful and so degrading and demoralizing and so lost and so dark. There's just no way that I would ever take that chance. So I had to make sure that plant medicines weren't that chance. And I had to become really convinced. And that was just having to do with a lot of self-inquiry and really starting to ask more people about the experience of sober people doing that and what the results were. And does anyone ever go off the rails? And as far as I could tell, it's quite contrary that most people that have had drug abuse problems that do iboga, mostly like with opiates, it seems to be iboga, but alcoholics and other drug addicts and stuff of varying degrees of severity will do plant medicines and they're sober now. Like they didn't go to rehab, they didn't go to AA, they did plant medicine, they had this awakening. And it started to occur to me that really in traditional recovery, the way that I was able to recover from my addictions, which were multiple, was by having a spiritual experience and surrendering my life to God. And it's just one day I prayed and something absolutely phenomenal and indescribable happened to me. I was just set free, and there's no possible way that was anything other than God hearing my plea and my petition to be rescued from that bondage. And I was. And so I had a spiritual experience that then removed the need for drugs and alcohol because I found some sense of connection to self and connection to something greater than myself. And that power did for me what I couldn't do for myself. And then I spent the next 22 years pursuing that relationship with God and pursuing any and all forms of personal development and healing on all the levels of my persona. And I think with plant medicines, and not for everyone, and I would never tell anyone who's like sober to go do plant medicines. Like that is some shit you really have to figure out yourself. I would not want to hold that responsibility karmically in case somebody is not in a place where they could do it and really have a wholesome intention and have integrity in why they're doing it and how they do it. But for me, it's like I look back on even the origins of Alcoholics Anonymous and that's where most people in the world have been able to escape from alcoholism and addiction the world over. I mean, it's the most successful method that's ever existed in recorded history by far. And it's had such an influence on not just even Western culture now, but world culture. It's just the phenomenon of those teachings is just absolutely transformed society, and it's the basis of all group therapy and so many different things because it's not religious, it's spiritual, but how it came to be. And I was telling this to Melissa, who was unfamiliar with the story, as most people aren't unless they're, sober or something. But the co-founder of AA checked himself or got checked into a hospital because he was just, hope to die alcoholic. And while he was going through DTs, he had this, what he called a white light experience, and the room was filled with light, and a holy wind blew through the room, and he saw God, and the guy was rendered sober in that moment, and he was like really like hope to die, or gnarly alcoholic. And so he realized that a spiritual experience was the answer to that affliction, and set about to meet someone else. And, it's a whole long story, but that's the basis of how most people on the planet that are able to escape, which is a very small minority of people that are so afflicted, that's how they get out. That's how they find redemption, is by having a spiritual experience that is usually brought about in the process of learning the spiritual tools and principles within the 12 steps and applying those to your life. And those start to become integrated into your DNA, into who you are. You learn how to be honest with yourself. You learn how to make restitution to the people you've harmed. You learn how to inventory yourself. You turn your will and your life over to God. You come to believe that there's another power other than your power. You begin to pray and meditate every day. And finally, toward the end of that process, you begin to live a life of service where your life is devoted to helping others. And that is the way that you keep yourself out of that abject self-centeredness and selfishness that is inherent to being in the lower animal state of addiction. And so that's how you start to deal with your trauma, and how you start to deal with your lack of ability to manage your life and operate within the world as a functional person, is through that spiritual experience. But that, for most of us, is a really long, drawn-out process. So plant medicines, to me, adding it into my journey, I've already been having a spiritual experience, just little crumb by crumb by crumb, with a few peaks here and there. A deep meditation, or just, I've had like a couple times where I've definitely had a visitation from some sort of aspect of God, where it's just like, oh, wow, the room just got really trippy. There's something happening here, and you just know that it's that. But deepening that spiritual experience through ayahuasca has been absolutely transformative, because it's allowed me to go deeper into that. And as I just described before, really get to the root of things. It's, in therapy, you can do a lot, because you can sit with someone and kind of tell them about your life, and they go, you know what, you might not see this, but you ever thought about the fact that because your dad did this and your uncle did this and mommy did this, that's why you do this? And you're like, oh shit. But that can take a long, long time. In one ayahuasca ceremony, I've had years worth of therapy in 5 or 6 hours, and I'm just like, ding, 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 ding. All the dots are connected. Go, oh shit. This is why, not only why I am the way I am, and why some of these habits and patterns have ingrained themselves in my character, but also in most, if not all cases, shown how to undo it, or have it just be undone for me. Mm-hmm. And that's a powerful adjunct to all of the fundamental growth and maturity that comes with walking a straight and narrow path of recovery, and learning about and applying spiritual principles to your life. So I feel like it was perfect timing for me, because I felt really solid in my desire to live as a ostensibly sober person, But then also after ayahuasca, I was like, shit, I can trust myself. I trust myself to make sound decisions. I'm not, as I said, I didn't leave ceremony and be like, oh, I bet I could drink some beers now. Like, no, nope, still can't do that. But I started microdosing psilocybin. I go, wow, God, I get a lot of work done. I'm very focused and creative on the days that I do that. And I've microdosed LSD and ketamine and other things intentionally with a purpose. And when I say micro, I mean micro, as in barely discernible effect, and absolutely able to drive and, go to court or do, like just be completely, actually even feel almost more clear and more sober, but I would have never done that before. Like 2 years ago, if you're like, hey, you want to microdose LSD? I'm like, fuck no, are you crazy? I'm not taking LSD.
Right.
But I started to, just meet different people in different circles and see the efficacy of some of these things, especially as it pertains to neuroplasticity, which is what I was really doing last night in that quantum field, was going in and using intention and creating neuroplasticity and rewiring my brain. And you have the ability to do that, I think, with a lot of different medicines in the psychedelic realm. It's a strange place to be. And also, I had to really own the fact that I could be judged negatively by people within my social circle that know me as a person that's sober, and they might think now I'm not, or can I still is it still valid to say, oh, I've been sober for 22 years? It's like, I
Right,
don't
because
know.
where's the line, right?
I guess it depends what your definition is. I mean,
Right.
if you're talking strictly, then I guess not, but I still consider myself that way. And I also had to look at my attachment to that identity of like, it's when you're sober for a long time, it becomes a badge of honor because you
Right.
meet if I met you and you were sober, I'd be like, how much time you got? And you're like 4 years. And I'd be like, oh yeah, I got 22 years.
Right.
It's just, the ego will feed on any stupid shit it can, it's like listen, it is an accomplishment, but it's more of a gift than it is something you do for yourself in my experience. So it's not like I'm sober out of virtue. I'm sober out of necessity.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like I did it because I'm a great guy. I did it because I was going to die and I hated my life and I wanted to slit my fucking wrists,
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, okay, I get some credit for at least having the will to live and have a more complete sense of this existence. But it's something that's been done for me. So, I had to really look at my attachment to that. And it was kind of scary doing a podcast about it because I talk about recovery a lot. And I know a lot of sober people listen to my podcast. And I've been very active in recovery for a long time in different ways. And I've worked with a lot of other guys and helping them along the path. And so, it was like, oh, shit, get ready. You might face some opposition here, but there might have been something said behind my back, but no one seemed to bust my balls personally. And if they did, it's just, as I said, I learned to trust myself and I know my motives are pure and I know I'm evolving and changing and growing. I don't feel stuck and I don't feel like at all that I'm in regression, like going backwards in terms of my level of consciousness. It's abundantly clear to me that my level of consciousness and clarity and awareness about everything within my experience is going up and becoming higher all the time. In conjunction with a couple medicine experiences and all the other work that I continue to do, all the meditation and all of the just boots on the ground, just humble, praying to God, surrendering to God, just doing my best to be of service, to be in integrity as much as I can and all of that.
I want to go back to that day where you talk about having this spiritual experience, and I have a couple questions that came up, which were, were you raised religious, for one? Did you have a concept of God before that happened? And did that change for you after this experience? Did it turn out to be something totally different than you thought, or what was your relationship like?
Fortunately, I think for me, I wasn't raised with any religion or any spirituality to speak of. It wasn't, my family wasn't anti-spiritual or, they didn't talk shit about religious people or church or anything. It just wasn't part of either side of my family. My parents divorced when I was maybe 2 or 3, and I don't remember anyone ever going to church for any reason except my dad remarried, and his second wife after my mom was Catholic, and I think she took me to church a couple times because I think she went here and there, but it wasn't like I had to join or anything like that. So I would say I probably had an aversion to it just because I was a little stoner kid that listened to Black Sabbath and was just like, fuck the man, fuck church. You know what I mean? It's just, I think I was just anti anything, other than sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And so it was definitely not a part of my life, but.
How old were you when this happened?
I was 26 when I got
26.
sober. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So, but what happened is really interesting, actually. There's, this whole connection to the East that I have. I've been practicing kundalini yoga for a number of years, and I practice Vedic meditation. I'm like really drawn into the kind of Vedic worldview and Hinduism to some degree. And there's just like, I have a certain visceral connection to the Eastern teachings of India specifically. And I think how that came to be was on my dad's side of the family, his 2 sisters and his mother, my grandmother, started going to India to visit the ashram of a saint who has since passed named Satya Sai Baba, dude with the fro and an orange robe, who was later accused of molesting kids and all this weird shit. So I don't know. But when they were going there, it seemed very pure and everything was on the up and up. And they would come back and tell me these stories of how he would manifest vibhuti in their hand right in front of them. And he would, he'd have an empty palm and just a gold ring would like fly out of his palm into your hand and just crazy shit. And doing bilocation, where he would be speaking to one group of people in the ashram and at the same time be in a different room, 3 buildings away talking to another group of people, or would be speaking to a room full of people after darshan that were international, and each person in the room would hear what he was saying in their native language, even though he didn't speak those languages on record, and just things like that. And I knew that the family members that were relaying these mystical stories to me weren't crazy, and they weren't liars. So I just was struck with the idea that there was some truth to that. And that was very fascinating to me, just out of a curious place, just the miracles that the cities that some of these sages are able to perform. And I've since come to understand that there's a lot of them that have been able to do this, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they're, any more enlightened than the rest of us. They've just accessed and harnessed a certain way of manipulating physical reality in a way that's uncommon nowadays. And so anyway, I was really intrigued by this. And so they gave me like a little Satya Sai Baba book. And then my cousin Aaron gave me a book that's become one of my favorite books. It's called I Am That by Nisargadatta Maharaj. And I remember trying to read that. I'd be all high and I would just be like, God, there's the answers in this I Am That book. Like I knew it was in there, and it's really about non-duality, and now I read that book and I'm like, duh, like I totally get it, because I've, been working on that framework for a long time. But that book, I think, really got me, even though I could only read a couple pages of it and I didn't fully get it, but it just showed me that there was another side of reality, because I was so deeply entrenched in the earth plane and just in survival mode and just living at that base instinctual level, and didn't have access to the higher realms unless I was able to use drugs that lowered the negative emotional and mental state to where the real state of being, which is actually just being sober, existed. So it's like when you get high on those type of drugs, your consciousness is not elevated. It's just that the lower states of consciousness are blocked off. And so what you experience is a sense of being high, but it's actually just how you're supposed to be. So, I didn't know that at the time, but that later became clear, because you don't really get high. If you think about it, if you take Coke, like you think you're high, you're not high. You're just like, you're distracting yourself from the pain that you normally experience. So, and you come up with all kinds of great ideas on how to solve the world's problems that make no sense the next day. That's the difference between ayahuasca and like doing Coke or heroin or crystal meth. It's like the next day the shit actually makes sense. And you're like, oh yeah, no, that's still good. When you're on like street drugs or the kind of derivative lower energy drugs, the insights you have are rarely, if ever, useful later. So back to Sai Baba. So I'm strung out on heroin. I kept getting off it. I'd go kick. I'd do what I call a train spotting. I'd have someone lock me up in a room somewhere without car keys. And I didn't even have a car, so there's no need for keys. But I'd sequester myself somewhere where I would get too sick to get out and get any more, basically. And that was my way of like kicking. And every time I did, I'm like, I'm never doing that again. Ever, 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 never again. I'm just going to drink and smoke weed. That was always my big plan. And so the times in between started to get shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter, until it was like I would go kick, and then a week later, as soon as I felt good, I'd be back on it again. And it was like, oh man, this is not going to end well. And I started just become very aware of the reality that it wasn't going to be long before I got rolled or robbed or arrested or OD'd, or, I was like getting to that place where it was getting real sketchy and dangerous. And I was, hanging around with people that were just really dark street people and, gangs and just all this weird shit. So anyway, I got those little Sai Baba books and I started praying to Sai Baba, and I felt totally stupid, but I didn't have anything else to work with, and he had done these miracles and helped other people. And I thought maybe he can help me. So my prayer was like, can I just smoke weed? Could you, orange robe man, can I just like blaze and just, I swear to God, I won't do anything else, but I want to smoke weed all day, every day, all night, every night, 24/7. And then I'm good. Cause I kind of was, I love smoking weed. It made me, dysfunctional and numb and lazy and tired. And, it was no way to live ultimately, but I could still kind of find some relief. And, that prayer didn't work. I kept at it. And then when I went into that treatment center, the experience I described on February 15th, 1997 was checked in this place, just hammered. I mean, it was one of the best drunks of my whole life, to be honest. I was just shit-faced drunk and just having a blast because it was like, it's like I was going up in front of the firing squad. And I was just like, you know what? Fuck it. I'm done, you know? And
Wow.
my mom drove me out to this rehab, and I remember like I was in the parking lot. I still had some beer. She let me stop and get some beer at the liquor store, and I was pounding them in her car the whole way. And I was like, glub, 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 you know, in the parking lot, and like hyperventilating my last joints, you know. And I'm like, I got to get as fucked up as possible just to walk through that door. And then finally they were, you know, my mom, they're calling my mom like, dude, we're closing. Like, is this kid coming or what? And she's like, you have to go. And she dropped me off. Came to the next morning and was like, oh shit, what have I done? And just woke up all hungover like, oh my God, I'm in rehab? Dude, what am I can't do this. I can't do this. And I was withdrawing from so many different things too. I was just a wreck. So I think, as I recall, you know, it's all a bit blurry, but it makes the story sound good if I just stick with this because the story I always tell, but something to the effect of like going in the counselor's office of the nurse and be like, hey, I'm freaking out. Like, what do I do? And thinking I could get some medication or something. And they're like, yeah, I mean, because I'd already kicked heroin a week before, so I didn't qualify for Suboxone or something to help you withdraw, you know, easily or more easily. I don't think there's ever an easy way, but except maybe Boga, from what I understand. But anyway, they're like, no, what we do here, Luke, is we just pray. I was like, really, dog? Like that? Pray. Okay. Because I prayed to Sai Baba, and I couldn't just smoke weed. It didn't work. I tried prayer, you know. And just pray to a God of your understanding. And I was like, okay, well, I'm left with no other choice. And I went to my room and I kneeled in front of the bed and I just said, I surrender. Just so quite a pregnant pause. I just said, please help me, man. I can't do this anymore, you know? And it wasn't like anything happened, you know? I wish it was that the walls started reverberating and the curtains blew and I was filled with the golden light through all my chakras or something, but it was just, I was still miserable, still in pain, still sad, still depressed, still broken in every way possible. But in that moment, the desire and craving to drink and use is completely gone. And for someone like me, where I had come from, that had never been gone for 5 minutes. You know, it was just always on 24/7. I mean, I would wake up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom and do drugs. I mean, I couldn't breathe a sober breath at all for a long, long time. And so as the days wore on there, and it was really difficult and everything, but I sensed that something had been done for me because I wasn't like, I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to run away and find a liquor store. You know, it's like I surrendered into that and just was like, I know I can't help myself. And it seems as though whatever this thing is that I asked for help has already helped me. And that was the mustard seed that had been planted that gave me the curiosity and the desire to find out what that was. And that's what I'm doing here. What is that? How can I have more of that? How can I avail more of myself to that majesty and that miraculous, loving, all-knowing power that some of us just call God? It's like, God, if it can do that, that's the unthinkable. That's impossible. And it did that. Maybe it could help me with anything that I present to it, if I can present it in an earnest and humble enough manner to allow it in. You know, it's like, because we're given free will, it's our karmic gift to be able to work our way through the levels of consciousness from hopefully low to high as you go, although many people regress. I'm sure I have. We're given that free will as a gift. And it's a strange gift because when you give the free will back to God, then God begins to use your will for you in a sense. So it's like, I still have my will. I want a big house. I want a hot wife. I want a car. I want happiness. I want success. I want everything, material, non-material. I want it all. I want peace and serenity, and I want to help other people and have an impact and all those things. But it's like my desire has to be met with the will of that creator. Because my will alone is limited in its scope of understanding and possibility. And it will be short-sighted. I'll sell myself short. And so in that moment, I surrendered my will in favor of a higher will that was more invested in truth and integrity. And that was the beginning. But then in order to keep that, I had to really, really dive in and not fuck around. And I was one of the lucky ones. A lot of people go to rehab. I'm not going to listen to these guys, man. You still have that defiance, but I was just at that sweet spot of vulnerability, teachability, humility. It's just like, I have no more answers. I'm done. I am done. I never, ever, ever want to drink again or anything else. And so because I had that sincere desire and a willingness to do whatever it took, they gave me a plan of action. In 28 days, when you leave here, here's the things that you have to do. And I didn't balk. I did everything that I was told. It was maybe the first time in my life that some sort of authoritative agency of some kind suggested or told me what I was to do. And I said, okay, I'll do it, because the alternative was so excruciating. So that's the story of a boy named Luke.
Wow. That is, that's so powerful. And I think definitely in working with this medicine, and, I've been at Soltara since November 1st. We're in 2019 and we're now in December, nearing Christmas. But one thing that I have definitely learned in my last 7 weeks here working with the medicine and my time here as a guest in May of this year, I guess I got to sit with you last night, and that was ceremony number 11 for me in the last 6 months, I guess.
Damn.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
And it's a paradox, man. Like, surrender is such a paradox. It's like we have to get to that rock bottom and, like you said, almost like give away or offer. It's not a giving away. It's like an offering of the free will, almost like you're putting it on an altar of the divine. It's like there's nothing left to do. I personally have had moments where I was crumpled, crying in the bottom of the shower, being like, Earth, just fucking swallow me up. Like, I don't want to be here anymore. And everyone's telling me how good I have it, and I don't feel it. And that like makes me feel so much more shame, because it's like, look how much you have to be happy for. And like, you come from a good family and you have money and you're not in a third world country and you have food on the table, and you're like, damn it, they're right. Then why do I feel this way? I'm totally broken. And I never really had a problem with alcohol personally. It does run in, I think my grandfather had issues with alcohol, but I had this one day a couple summers ago where things in my life, I live in New York City, and things in my life had gotten just horrible. I had been wrought with a whole bunch of different things all in 1 week. Just things were going wrong. I mean, my car got towed and I was already depressed. I tried to find like my third therapist and just wasn't jiving with any of them. And of course, it's like impossible to find one that takes your insurance and all of this stuff. It was just horrific. And I had all the tools. Like, I had been reading The Secret and all of these spiritual texts. I came from a family that had primed me with all these things. And I remember desperately staring at the pages of all this wisdom and just not feeling any of it. And that was the most terrifying part, because I just felt so disconnected and so hopeless. And I couldn't talk to anybody about it because I felt like at that point, you start running those stories in your head, and my family had been there for me through my roller coasters of emotions. And at some point, you just don't want to alarm people anymore. And you kind of feel like the boy who cried wolf. It's just like, oh, she's going through another one of her emotional ups and downs. Hallie just feels really deeply. And so I really felt like nobody knew how bad it was. And I remember this one evening, I was like, all right, I'm just going to take, I think I was reading the law of attraction. I was like, I'm going to take the law of attraction. I'm going to go sit at a like little bar across the street, just have a glass of wine and relax. And I'm going to read, and I'm going to take notes, and I'm going to try to absorb this and get better habits. I'd been journaling every day, and I wanted to maintain that. And I remember I was reading at the bar, and this man came up to me and kind of struck up a conversation. Oh, what are you reading? And it felt really good to be talking to someone. And there was something about the anonymity and a stranger, because I was hiding how bad things were from all of my friends. They were trying to reach me. I wasn't really answering my texts. So survival, right? The instinct, the need for connection. And I just started chatting with this person. Then another person came, and we were all just having a great conversation. And I remember, let's have another glass of wine. Let's have another glass of wine. Oh, bartender, keep her glass full. And, you know, I didn't really drink much, so that was just not a really good idea. But it was the first time I felt that levity in a really long time. And my 2 promises to myself for my self-care that I was trying to improve was to take baths every day, really like nourish my body, and then journal. So I don't remember what time it was when I got home, because my phone had died, and thank goodness I got home safely, because I completely don't remember going up the stairs or unlocking my apartment or any of it. But I knew that I needed to take my bath, and I needed to write in my journal. And it still makes me really sad to think about, because the next morning I woke up and I must have been like slipping or falling in the bathtub, and I just had like bruises. I was unsure about their origin. And I flipped open my journal, and the words on that page were the most horrific, illegible, chicken scratch hatred that I've ever seen. I mean, it was a step away from wishing death upon yourself. You know, it was just like, how could I'm in this state right now. This is so embarrassing. I'm trying to make things better. See, I knew I wasn't, worth anything. And I remember the next day, like, I did not leave my apartment. I felt more isolation, more pain than ever before. And I thought, I just kind of laid in my bed, it was 1-bedroom apartment. I didn't have roommates, and all my family lives far away. And I was like, if I died today, I wonder how long it would take for someone to find me. Would people even know? And I've been avoiding everybody. The weight of that story, like how insignificant you feel when you say that to yourself, was like, that was my moment. I was like, dude, something's got to give here. So, that wasn't terribly long ago. And I think that I was in an addictive cycle with my own suffering. Like this. And I think a lot of that came from childhood stuff. And, by no fault of anyone's, my parents had a divorce when I was 9, a 3-year custody battle. And that really fucked with my sense of security and trusting people, because there were lawyers involved. And 9 years old, I had my own lawyer because it had to be, separate from theirs. And we were just like, it was a mess. So of course that made me super vigilant, my whole life, and the suffering. So, that was part of what I had to address when I first came here, was my own addiction to suffering. And I think a lot of us have that, and we don't even realize, but it's a chemical thing.
Damn straight.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. There's a great book called The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks, and he uncovers this concept called the upper limit, where if you've not experienced liberation, freedom, happiness at high levels, and you have gotten addicted to those lower states of felt being, that there's this ceiling that you can't surpass. It's like you literally can't be happy, and nothing will make you happy because you don't have the capacity to reach that, because you have the self-imposed sort of governor on your capacity to experience joy and fulfillment and meaning and those things. It's a fascinating book. I really hit home. I was like, oh my God, because I could sense there have been so many times where I'm on the brink of actually feeling like I'm okay and life is positive and there's hope and faith that things are going to continue to get better. And it's like, no, Luke, don't fool yourself. You're meant to, that's for those people. You're meant to be depressed and have a sense of lack. So just stick with that. Don't even try to, jump in the deep end of the pool. Just keep it surface and just do your best to survive, that kind of thing. But again, like with so many of these things, when you become aware of it, that's the insight. I see what that pattern is now. Well, what would happen if I was just super goddamn happy? Maybe I can be that way, and start to explore that, because you do get addicted to being miserable. It's it's crazy. It just becomes the modus operandi. That's just how I am. Everything has to be a struggle and a fight, and it has to be frustrating and disappointing, and have to be afraid and have anxiety and be sad and all of those.
Yeah, I think we all know somebody like that probably. And to take it a step further, I think, what would it be like to be happy all the time, but then to not attach to being happy is like taking it the step further.
Right.
Because if we attach to being happy, then it becomes something we can lose, and then there's fear, and then it starts that whole cycle again. So just, this is what it is in this moment. I can find joy, I can find happiness in talking to you, in this air conditioning, in this beautiful day that's outside, in the nourishing food that I'm going to eat. And that's in the now, that's in the right now. And I think for me, at least, that's been critical to this new path I'm on of, it's not always perfect, but I'm learning to have fewer of those episodes where I feel like I'm worthless. They're few and far between now. And I think that comes from cultivating awareness, mindfulness, and just staying in the present as much as I possibly can. Yeah.
Hot damn.
Luke Storey, thank you so much for being on the Thought Room. I feel like we could riff forever, quite honestly.
That tends to happen.
I know. So we'll just have to rendezvous another time somewhere in the world.
For sure.
But before we hop off, was there anything else you wanted to share about your week? And two, how can people connect with you and find you online?
I think what I'd like to share about the week is that there are many windows that open into the mansion, and ayahuasca is one of them, and there are many others. So find your window. And where you can find me, social media-wise, most active on Instagram, at Luke Storey, Storey. I constantly do lives and stories in there of all of my interviews and hijinks and things like that. My podcast is the Life Stylist Podcast. I don't know whose will come out first, but it's probably going to be a 2-part series, or maybe even 3, depending on how long it ends up being, about the whole experience here at Soltara. And I also did one of those about rhythmia earlier this year. That was a 3-parter. It was like 6 hours worth of stuff. There's just, a lot happens in a week. Even to boil it down to 6 hours is hard. And then my website is lukestorey.com, and all my videos and speaking appearances and the podcast show notes and all that kind of stuff is there. That's kind of the mothership. But maybe the podcast is the best place to just kind of dive in and find out what I'm up to.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.